Welcome to the MIT at Innovation Program podcast. This is a repository of insights by thought leaders and practitioners of innovation where they speak about their views, insights, and experiences. Come join us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another exciting initiative by MIT ID Innovation Program. On behalf of the head of the Innovation Program, Associate Professor Harshit Desai, and the core team, we are grateful to be amongst you all hosting Day 5 of the MIT ID Innovation Grad Show 2020. For those who are joining us for the first time today, we'd like to inform you that MIT stands for the ever-progressive 4-decade-old Maharashtra Institute of Technology. ID stands for MIT's Pioneering Institute of Design. MIT ID's latest contribution to strengthening the global innovation ecosystem is the one-year innovation program, which focuses on the 4 pillars of design, business, technology, and humanities. The key features and differentiators of this one-year course are a hands-on, highly customized, pro-practical, project-heavy based learning, deep immersions, and humanities. We tested our agility, adaptability, resilience as a team when we seamlessly delivered value-add experiences to our student innovators and the world at large via more than about 35 industry interactions during the pandemic. More lined up as I speak. We take this opportunity to announce about our open online courses, which will commence this quarter. The duration of these certificate courses will range from 2 months to 9 months, in addition to a full-time 1-year campus-based course. We also take this opportunity to announce the Global Innovation Network Initiative, which will be led by MIT ID women innovators of the foundation cohort and the freshers. First Movers MIT ID Innovation Program strategically partnered with LinkedIn Learning as an optimal onboarding tool in the virtual era by which students can upgrade their business, creative, and technology-related skills. Student innovators gain that empowers them to shine amidst competition. On the occasion of MIT ID Innovation Program completing its first year, educating and nurturing innovators, we are pleased to have you all join us on Day 5 of the first ever virtual innovation grad show. This week-long grad show had several industry interactions lined up for our foundation cohort of innovators and the innovators class of 2020-21. A virtual send-off where the foundation cohort of innovators hands over the baton of innovation to the next batch to keep the creativity and energy flowing into the most impactful journeys ahead. So welcome one and all to Bookmarked, an intellectually stimulating series of book reading sessions of innovation bestsellers. The virtual book reading sessions will take place 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Bookmarked will have a guest reader share his insights for the first half hour, followed by questions in the latter half hour. Here are the bestsellers that got bookmarked across July and August 2020. July 24th, we covered Where Good Ideas Come From by Steven Johnson. July 31st, we covered Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit. 7th August, we covered The Culture Code. And then 14th August, we covered The Hidden Connections by Fritjof Capra. Today, we tune into Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Next Friday, we'll cover Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman. We are joined by the head of the innovation program, Associate Professor Harshit Desai, a PhD research candidate and industry professional who has spent a decade plus in the education domain, who will be in conversation with our guest reader and innovator, Mr. Shekhar Badwe. Founding director of Locus Design, a leading strategy and design company. Shekhar is an NID alumni with 17 plus years of diverse experience in strategic design, innovation, design research. He's also a jury at India Design Mark by Government of India. A member of CII's National Committee on Design and Design Interventions in Smart Cities. A bit about the author of this bestseller. So Daniel is an Israeli psychologist and economist, notable for his work on the psychology of judgment and decision-making, as well as behavioral economics, for which he was awarded the 2002 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences. His empirical findings challenged the assumption of human rationality prevailing in modern economic theory. In 2011, he was named by Foreign Policy magazine in its list of top global thinkers. In the same year, his book Thinking Fast and Slow, which summarizes much of his research, was published and became a bestseller. In August 2013, President Barack Obama announced that Daniel would be a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. This is our 38th industry interaction this season, and I'm Priya Dhawan, Head of Collaborations, Branding and Outreach for the MIT ID Innovation Program. Welcome you all once again to this thoughtfully curated innovation journey. Please do read the chat for other important pointers that have been shared. Warm welcome once again, Shekhar. Over to you.
Hi, Priya. Thanks. Thanks, Archie.
Yes, sir. Good evening, and thank you once again for joining for this again very very interesting and I would say one of the most simplest books that we are taking in this series. Uh, in fact, if there was a Nobel for simplicity, it should be given to Daniel Kahneman because again thinking as a concept itself is very less understood. Means we still don't really know how we work at a cognitive, at a thinking level, and what happens at a brain level. But I think this is that book which demystifies thinking in so many ways. So I think that's the first step for any creative or innovative, or for that matter any regular activity, I would say. And yeah, let's see what's the best takeaways from this book for us.
It's always tough to talk about bestsellers.
Yeah.
Because they put extra pressure on me in terms of trying to present these books in a very short, yet succinct, yet informative and entertaining manner. So let's attempt this again this Friday.
Yeah.
But my favorite is coming the next Friday in terms of the way it has opened up my thinking.
Fantastic.
This book definitely makes you think. It makes you also feel bad, saying that, oh my God, I've been fooled into situations so many times. And it helps you realize many things that you fall prey for. And also helps you in terms of articulating or looking at things differently. So I think this book is a great addition to our bookmarked series. It also falls in place rightly after Fritjof Capra. He's very technical on one end.
Yeah.
And Daniel Kahneman is very practical, very straightforward, very pragmatic on the other end. So I think we're getting to see the spectrum in terms of thinking. So let's head into this. This book is, though apparently simple to read and understand, Daniel Kahneman has put in, I think, more than 4 decades of his research and experience into writing a book like this. I'm going to do whatever justice in 30 minutes, trying to.
He has already done four decades of hard work and made things simple for us. I would put it in that way.
Absolutely, and not so simple, because it can't be simpler than this.
Yeah.
Is what I also realize. So now, while presenting, I'm not presenting the entire book with this entire content. I've picked up few important, interesting fallacies, very interesting points. Otherwise, it will run into 2-3 hours of discussion. So to keep it to 30 minutes, I've tried to do that. So let's straight jump into this and see what we gather out of this. All right. Screen is visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, visible.
All right.
Audible.
So I've purposely chose this funky color gradient because this is how our life is. Hazy blue at one end and pink on the other side. And we probably are fluctuating in this flux of color gradient. And this is how our decision making is. So Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And let's see. So Thinking Fast and Slow essentially ties back to human psyche. Human psyche ties back to how our brain is structured. Our brain is structured into largely three components, but we're discussing two components today. We are not going to look at neurology, neurochemistry, or neurosciences. We're looking at the fun side of we as humans and decision makers. So one is a conscious brain, which is a thinking brain, analytical brain, the neocortex, prefrontal cortex, and this is where our slow brain is. It requires time to think. But there is a funny character called the subconscious brain, the reptilian brain. This brain does not take time. It is super fast. It is way faster than we think that it is. So Thinking Fast and Slow actually is talking about these two systems in our brain which control our behavior, our decision making, our abilities to judge, abilities to memorize, and stuff like this. So this book is all about understanding the fast and the slow. And then how do we deal with this? How do we overcome certain things which are done by the fast brain and control it by slow brain, by thinking, putting in some thought so that we don't get swindled, we don't get fooled, we don't fall prey, or we don't make errors or false decisions. This is what this book is all about. So our brain, as I said, is determined by two systems. One is the fast and the other one is the slow. The fast is where all the involuntary control is. All right. This is where speed is. This is where our reflexes are. This is where our intuition is. This is where our breathing and all sorts of things are controlled. And this is the super fast brain. On the other side, this is not left and right brain, by the way. This is two systems in the brain. The slow brain essentially is analytical. It requires effort, thoughts, it requires concentration, it requires patience, it requires reasoning, it requires choice, it requires concentration to make a decision. And you get to see and you get to know in your daily life at every moment these two brains are fighting. And most often the fast brain takes over. System 1 takes over system 2. And this is where our gut feelings are. This is where our emotions are. This is where most of our involuntary thinking happens, which is the subconscious thinking. And it happens in every small decision to every big decision. All right. What also happens is, interestingly, system 1 takes over because our brain is lazy. It wants to conserve energy. So system 1 takes over most of the times because it does not want to expend energy or the calories that we've earned, and it takes over. It also creates false scenarios. It also creates arguments within your head saying that no, my experience says this, my memory says this, somebody had said that, and you quickly jump to some sort of a bias, some sort of a decision. And you also believe in those arguments and you move ahead with system 1. But quite often, system 1 is not thorough. It is not accurate. It is not foolproof. And this is where we make false judgments. We make statements based on system 1, and we might enter into even bigger a challenge. And this is all the brain's doing. This is beyond your control as far as system 1 is concerned. But if we practice system 2 and tell system 1 to shut up and listen to system 1, we might do things which are far better for us and for the society if we choose system 2. System 1 is all impulse buying that we do. Most of the impulse buying is system 1. So what I'm going to do in next few slides quickly is I've put in a summary of major fallacies, major decisions which are based on irrational logic or things that advertisers have done things that marketeers have done to us, to how decision making varies between system 1 and system 2. So let's start with the most exciting one, which is called the priming. You get to see this image on the right hand side, and instantly you know that red can equal to Coca-Cola, with those two white things happening there. The moment you see this without Coca-Cola mentioning it, refreshing or whatever, in few seconds you might have an urge to buy a drink, buy a Coke. This is the resultant of priming. They've primed your brain. This also happens in movies and music videos and stuff like this, where there are simple, quick nudges which nudge you to buy or nudge you to take a decision. All right. So red equal to Coca-Cola happens. Green equal to, let's say, lime. So stuff like this creates positive imagery in our heads. Advertisers use that to their advantage. Marketers use that to their advantage. But if we pause and think, we might let go of this nudge. We might let go of, or we might avoid this priming. But this priming also helps in good things. You might prime for good decisions. You might prime for good behavior. You might prime for not throwing things on the road and probably in the dustbin. This is how priming could be used. Priming is used a lot of subliminal messaging that happens through music or films and all sorts of things, advertising for that matter. So priming, we get nudged because it invokes some sort of particular direction or decision or action. Second is cognitive ease. Whatever is easier is something that we believe. Whatever is easier is something that we choose. Whatever is easier that we decide. We don't like to go into complication. We don't like to get into very elaborate analytical cognitive method of deciding something. Like if you have to buy a drink, you're not going to sit and analyze and think about the calories, the money, the wastage and whatnots. You will say that, okay, let me just grab this drink. So your brain is pushing to do things which are easier because the brain is lazy. It doesn't want to spend money. It doesn't want to spend, that is the energy currency. It doesn't want to go into a difficult path. How much ever wrong it is, it will choose the simplest path. This also is used in a lot of, unfortunately, falsehood or repetition that pushes people to do things. But I will always look at all the slides that I'm presenting from a positive side. Can we use cognitive ease to do something good? Can we push people to quickly decide what is good? All right. Like another simple example is we like spending rather than saving, because spending is very easy and quick. Saving and earning will require elaborate plan, and hence the brain is tuned to do something. There's a famous economist in UK, an Indian, who has devised a system that you can spend money and save. All right. So there's an elaborate system that he has used cognitive ease to devise something good for people. Jumping to conclusions, very famous, very fast. All of us do it. So what you see is all there is. And this is the tendency of system 1, to draw conclusion based on readily available, sometimes misleading information. We don't like to wait. We don't like to really think over. And we like to jump to conclusion. This is also, again, confirmation bias. All right. So we look for evidences and we satisfy our need to analyze, and we quickly take decisions. So rationally, we should look for evidence that contradicts our beliefs. All right. We should subject our belief system to more scrutiny, greater scrutiny, and hence this system will be changed. Otherwise, we will succumb to system 1 always. Not always it is bad, but we should control. There's something called as heuristic method or heuristic biases also. Heuristic biases are essentially quick judgments based on our own baggage, stereotype, our own conditioning, our own experiences, and we answer very quickly. The image shows it very quickly. A slightly rough looking man will be termed as, by the jury, as a culprit without really wanting to go into the detail. This is as simple as it can get. By the look of it, we don't want to get into the details, but by certain heuristic markers, we will say that this fellow could be a possible culprit. Example, let's say tattoos. Tattoos shows a particular type of human being, but not all tattoo having people are bad. All right. So we need to question it differently so that we don't fall for this easier question or easier answering. All right, the heuristic thing. So we need to bend this. We need to challenge the heuristic program that is into our brains. Law of small numbers. And we have tremendous faith in small numbers. Our tendency to seek patterns. If we see something very quickly, we snap judgment, saying that if you throw marbles on the table, and if somebody asks you, what is the guess? What are the numbers? How many are there? And we will guess instantaneously without even thinking as to what is the pattern looking like? How many could there be? If the rows are like this and the columns are like that, approximately it could be so much. We don't put in so much effort. And we love to do this. The law of small numbers refers to incorrect belief. And all experts to lay people will have this belief. Most of the stock market will work on very minuscule data. All stock pundits will work on absolutely minuscule data or very small numbers. Small numbers are not between 1 and 2, 1 and 10, but small numbers are small sample sizes. So we should push ourselves to think, or rather stop, pause, think, and then challenge these numbers or challenge our belief or our supporting arguments so that we don't make a mistake, we don't make a costly mistake. All right, so stock market is a good programs are done on very small sample sizes. Anchors is phenomenal. All of us fall for this. All right, anchor is a form of priming method. Anchor starts with the first information that you get to see, the initial information. So let's say if somebody, you're buying something from somebody, and that other person says that this, let's say you're buying a bicycle, and that person says that this bicycle is for 10,000, that becomes your initial benchmark. You cannot say that, no, I want to buy it at 1,000 rupees. He's not going to agree. And you know it in your mind that he will not agree. So hence, you will not pitch 1,000 rupees. You will pitch probably 7.5 or 7,000 rupees. So it doesn't look like a stupid argument or stupid bargain. This also acts as a great primer, great anchor. If you see these sale figures, the image shows it very clearly. If $1,000 is put there, and you get to see that it is offered at 250, your benchmark, your anchor is $1,000, and 250 is such a small amount compared to $1,000. You will eventually buy that product. This is how anchors work. So you should identify where these anchors are. These anchors are typically in price and sale and negotiations and stuff like this. So if you have to do this and you have to use this, put an anchor close enough to your expectations so that the other person does not feel ridiculed and he does not feel that I am ridiculing the other person. So he has to come close to your number. So this is how anchors work. And they, of course, cloud our judgments, unfortunately. So we need to be careful of anchors. Availability bias. This bias actually occurs when, a great example is news. And this image again tells you this. Our news, if you switch on any news channel, the news channel will have absolutely ridiculous sample sizes or small numbers. And we place our judgment based on these small numbers, small news. We look at one news channel for 5 minutes and we create a world of our own belief, our own imagination around that small piece of news. Social media is a great example. One false fake news come onto our whatever social media and we form our opinions so instantaneously. This is how system 1 works. We need to put in system 2 into place saying that, no, hold on, let me look at alternate news. Let me look at alternate methods to assess information, and then I'm going to form my opinion, all right, or my judgment. This is how availability. If the availability of information is limited, unfortunately, we fall for it. This is another great example of representativeness. Uh, there's a simple example here, which I will cite. I'll quote Daniel Kahneman. You see a person reading New York Times on the subway. Which of the following is a better bet about the reading stranger? First choice is she has a PhD. Second choice is she does not have a college degree. All right. This representativeness, how it works is we might pick up the second answer, even though the probability of PhDs on the subway is far less compared to people with degrees. All right, PhDs might be in one day, one point in time. How many PhDs would be riding a subway in New York? Hardly any. How many people without college degree would be riding a subway in New York that day, that point in time will be far better, bigger than a PhD traveling. All right, but just because that person is holding New York Times, we might form an opinion, or we may not form an opinion. Sorry, in this case, we will say that she does not have a college degree. All right, so this is how representativeness works. Though a simple example, we have to, one way to resist the temptation of representativeness is to consider the base rate. Base rate is how many people would be there compared to the other. So what PhDs versus non-PhDs. All right. So the second answer sounds more feasible, but all said and done, there could be more PhDs that day. So we need to question this. We need to analyze this situation and then form an opinion. And this is where we end up clouding our judgment. Less is more. All right. So let's take another example. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She has majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination, social justice, and she also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Which alternative is more probable? Linda is a bank teller. Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. All right. In this case, the additional detail that Linda is active in the feminist movement in answer to only serves to make probability lower. All right. Bank teller and a feminist movement activist makes the probability lower. All right. So it imposes more constraints. But because of the accompanying narrative, we like the second option. So this active and feminist movement makes it more attractive for us to choose that decision. So hence, while we are taking decisions, we should remove unnecessary information which is not needed for that decision making, which might cloud our judgment, which might bias us, which might make the other proposition more attractive. All right. In this case, Linda is a bank teller. All right. Versus Linda is a bank teller and activist. So that activist phenomena is very interesting and it poses more constraints and hence we like it. So hence we should look at less is more. So filter out information, cut down unnecessary information, cut down irrelevant information from the information that you're getting to make your judgment. All right. So we should have the ability to weed out unnecessary stuff. This is a interesting one and a difficult one, though. I'll try and explain this. All right. So causes trump statistics. A cab was involved in a hit and run accident at a night. Two cab companies, the green and blue, operate in the city. You are given the following data. 85% of the cabs in the city are green, 15% are blue. A witness identified the cab as blue. All right, we've made our system one has decided already. Okay, let's see how it works. The court concluded that the witness correctly identified each one of the two colors 80% of the time and failed 20% of the time otherwise. All right. So 80% of 85% of green cabs and 80% of 15% blue cabs, which is more. All right. This is how it works. This is how it fools you. This is how numbers will fool you if the numbers are given in a particular way. All right. So what Kahneman says, he concludes that the probability of the guilty cab being blue is 41%, though it is showing the base rate as 15%. Most people will instinctively ignore the base rate and go with witness because 80 looks very high probability. All right. But one should go into the details, understand 80% of 15 and 80% of 85. This is how the system works. All right. You see this chart on the right hand side, it will be very simple to understand. The blue blocks. Witness saw a blue car and it was really blue, 48 blocks. Witness saw a blue car, but it was really green, 68 blocks. All right, this is how the system works. It fools you. So we should be careful. We should rework on the numbers, try and see how the stats are working, and then illustrate that example to ourselves. All right. So whenever you're posed this kind of question, pause, think, take your time, and then go into the details. All right. So the blue cap, though 15% base rate, has a higher probability, 41%. Endowment effect. This is very funny. So people are more likely to retain an object they own than acquire that same object when they don't own it. All right. So people's maximum willingness to pay versus willingness to accept. For example, participants first given a Swiss chocolate bar were generally unwilling to trade it off for a coffee mug. All right, so you're given a chocolate bar and somebody says that, oh, you give me that chocolate bar, I'll give you this coffee. Most participants were generally unwilling to trade. The reason is that we feel the feeling or this emotion of loss. Oh, I'm losing my chocolate bar. Because I had got it first, I don't want to give it away for a coffee. So this loss aversion, this loss phenomena in your head, in your brain, tells system one to say no. And once it is no, it is very difficult to exchange the coffee or the chocolate versus the coffee. This is how endowment effect works. All right, this is why endowment policies of LIC, etc., or LIC premium, life insurance is a problem. Because I don't want to spend money today for something that I'm going to get tomorrow or after I die after a few years or decades. So why should I spend money today? Why should I lose my money today? Let me retain it. So this is an unfortunate phenomena, yet this is how it works. Of course, one in hand is better than bush. It's a very famous phrase. All right. So it is a tendency to prefer avoiding losses to acquiring equivalent. Others putting their money, whatever money they have, in the stock markets. They don't want to lose whatever. Or most people don't gamble. This is the reason. Because I don't want to spend 1,000 rupees and expect 10,000. And if I don't get 10,000, then I'm losing 1,000 also. And hence we do not do these kinds of things. And this is how it has a significant effect on consumer behavior. All these things you get to see it in all the possible consumer behaviors. All right. So this is how discounts work. This is how surcharges are avoided or added without we knowing it. So loss aversion. So what it says is people aren't rational. We attach value to gains and losses rather than wealth itself. I don't want to lose, and hence I'm not looking at gaining or acquiring wealth in larger term. All right. So this is where our risk-taking abilities go down because we are not rational. System one has taken over. Frames of reference. This is a favorite example. You see this image. I don't even need to explain this on the left-hand side. Frozen yogurt, 20% fat only. On the other side, frozen yogurt, 80% fat-free. This is phenomenal. 80% fat-free, 80 is a bigger number. And I feel 80 is more. Actually, the content is the same. But this is how the mind works. This is how we might get fooled or we might be brought into a decision. We could use this for good. We could get people to do good with these kinds of things. This is the frame of reference. 80% fat free instead of saying that it has only 20% fat. So satisfaction, experience matters. It will cloud our judgment. It will cloud our decision making. System one takes over. If you've had a bad experience, your judgment is already clouded. And this essentially will put a lot of weight onto your thinking. So this is called the overweight, the recent. All right. So be careful if your judgments are being overweight by a recent experience, good or bad, and then you're making an irrational judgment or your system one is taking over. All right, the last one, and this is very interesting. Don't look at the bottom figure, only look at the top figure, and you'll be fooled. You might think that the central line with those two arrows is longer, but it is not. All three are equal. But this is what our mind gets fooled with, an illusion. So the top line with double arrows versus the line with two inverted arrows are equal length. But we think that the top one is smaller, the middle one is the longest, and then the second longest is the third one. So this is called the Muller-Lyer illusion. And Muller-Lyer illusion, whenever we see such kind of illusion with numbers, patterns, figures, priming, all sorts of things, we should be sensible, we should stop, we should pause. It should ring warning bells, but unfortunately there's no bell available, and cognitive illusions are generally more difficult than perception illusions. All right. So we should be careful of cognitive illusion. This is a cognitive illusion. Numbers will pose a cognitive illusion, all right, rather than perceptive illusions. So the brain is also worried that I'm already thinking hard to solve this problem. I'm thinking hard to take a decision. Don't add more trouble to me. Let me take system one and quickly take a decision and go ahead. So this is where we stop. This is the kind of small little bell. It will ring once probably. We should quickly stop saying, something is missing, something is wrong, something I'm not understanding. That is the moment one should stop to take a decision, and we might end up doing far better or taking a far better decision. So Daniel Kahneman's book, I recommend you guys should read, look at, make notes, in your projects, in your work, in your life, and create troubles for everybody. Don't make people fall for unnecessary things that they don't want and stuff like this. So thank you so much. This is about thinking fast and slow, system 1 and 2.
Great, sir. Thank you. Again, you always say that it is not possible to summarize a great work or a bestseller, but every time you are surprising, and every time we are getting better. So thanks for that. And also the
Thank
visuals
you, sir.
again this time are also very, very appropriate. And I think that's a challenge which you carry out very, very easily now.
Thank you.
I think there's some questions which will flow, but one thing which I would want to bring up is there a kind of a dominant system? Is it something which, like, a person is system 1 dominant or system 2 dominant, or is it more to do with the context in which the decision is made? So I can be a system 1 dominant person in some cases and system 2 dominant in other cases. How does that work?
I feel most of us, almost all of us, are system 1 dominant people.
Mm-hmm.
Because it comes out of a very long evolutionary cycle. All right, millions of years of evolution. That what is good and what is bad was a decision to be made extremely fast, fraction of seconds.
Mm-hmm.
All right, something in the dark is danger.
Yeah.
Your rational brain cannot take over, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
The reptilian brain or system 1 has taken over. It has taken the decision of pumping testosterone and also has decided that we have to either fight or run.
Barabar.
So most of us, fortunately, unfortunately, are system 1 driven.
Mm-hmm.
In given situations and contexts, we might fall for system 1, even if we are very rational people. But of course, there are some people who are extremely rational, but at times might fall for system 1, how much ever rational you are. So we need to be careful. That's about it. Not much can be done.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be pausing, thinking, stopping, and seeing it, asking if we do not know how and what is this going to affect me. That's a better deal. All right. You should always say that give me 5 minutes
Mm-hmm.
to think, or give me 1 day to think. Let me sleep over this, or let me ask my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the point in time we've seen in our own lives that we've taken better decisions. All right. But
Okay.
this is not true for every situation. If the situation is grave, danger, challenge, system 1 will take over. You have no choice.
Oh. And talking about economics, I think a majority of economic theory was based on this decision that man is a rational being, and this uh, this book kind of challenges that. So, how much of so I'm sure he got a Nobel for that. So I'm sure it's a valid and a substantial
Absolutely right.
contribution, substantial contribution. But how much of this is I don't know, is in the mainstream, because it's on both the sides, right? At one end, as say marketers or creators or designers, we have to use some of these techniques to nudge people towards a particular behavior, and on the
Correct.
other hand, we are also consumers and users of these services. So how do we resolve this in that sense, that how it has to be integrated into say a business decision making, or maybe a marketing plan or a communication creation?
I would personally look at it as an opportunity to nudge people to do good things.
Okay.
That's my point of view, of course, very personal point of view.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to use this to fool people into making decisions that they never wanted,
Okay.
or make bad choices
Mm-hmm.
for my own singular profit. Right? I think we've come to this situation and this day because of all people wanting to be greedy and capitalists only.
True.
There's no problem being in an economy. There's no problem in making money and wealth.
Mm.
At what cost is something that we need to decide. This is my personal point of view, my opinion. So I would use these systems or methods to educate or make people make proper decisions, right decisions, at least think over and give them a choice. Another aspect to this is that this will work fantastic against the entire tide that is trying to fool people in.
Mm. Yeah.
So if your design, your advertising, your communication helps people to think and see the rest of the world who's trying to fool them, they will come with you. So it has got a lot of altruistic value. It also has a lot of value otherwise, because then the customer will say that, oh, you never fooled me. You gave me the choice and now I want to be with you. So this is the bright side of things, and this is the good side of things one could also look at.
No, I
because
think
the rest of the world is on the other side.
and it's quite valid, because I think with the whole narrative now shaping up on kind of how do I build trust and how do I come across as a more honest and a transparent brand. This would surely help for people who want to make the right use of it rather than use it to fool people, because anyways that won't last long. And we have seen quite failures on that front as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now we have Kumar Skand asking a very interesting connect. Do sports persons use more or are bound to utilize system 1 most of the times because they have to take a split second decision in field?
I partially agree, but partially they've been trained. They've been phenomenally trained. If you watch a football match, especially the last World Cup, the way France was playing, I did not think any point in time that most of the time system 1 was taking over. In fact, they were so meticulous in their planning and strategy on the field, in total impromptu extempore, that it looked like that system 1 is taken over, but they've been so precise. They knew where the next player is, what move is he going to do. Otherwise, Croatia was doing phenomenally well. But France was like out of the world. So I feel that the athletes of this order have part 2 also, the system 2 also been trained years out, decades maybe. So I feel that they use both the systems, but of course being a human, part 1, system 1 will take over whenever he or she thinks that I have no choice but to kick the goal in or the ball in, and they will do it. Okay. So that's also the beauty of human nature, that we get to see a randomness, and then that the randomness also has some beauty. And probably if that person scores a goal, all of us win. But yes, part 2 is part of their training and way of working.
As audience, it comes across to us that it is very split second, but it is a lot of training and back end.
No, it is not. Yeah. Phenomenal work has happened. You can't pass the ball like this and score goals and defend and dribble and stuff like this. Oh my. See Michael Jordan and you feel that it is magic.
Yeah.
That magic is decades of experience, skill, and of course that inherently that person has something. So it almost feels like it is only system 1. But it's not.
Thank you for that, sir. So Dinesh Pal is asking, which mind persuades a user to buy things in short term, and emotional trait is connect to which mind? The conscious mind or the subconscious mind? And also, sir, if you can use this opportunity to talk about the right brain and left brain, because you did mention that this is system 1, system 2 is not equal to left brain and right brain. So maybe you can connect on that as well.
Right brain and left brain is, I feel, is just a simpler way to explain things. But the brain works slightly more in a complicated manner. So 93% decisions are emotional, 7% are rational. All right, this is the percentage, and these are not my numbers. Some researcher who, of course, is a PhD in neurosciences, so he's put these numbers in. So we're looking at 93%. So almost all our decision making eventually ends up being emotional. That does not mean it is system 1 only.
Okay.
Your emotional decision also could be ratified, supported, complemented by system 2. This is what Daniel Kahneman is also saying. He's not saying that become a rational being, forget all the emotions. We can't do that, unfortunately. We should not at times. Otherwise, we'll be robots. And I'm sure we won't love it. So, support your emotional decisions. So, if you're buying a house, which is a big investment, is that not an emotional decision? It is. After you've compared all the spec sheets, all the details and functionalities, eventually it comes down to कि पसंद आया क्या, इसमें मुझे feeling अच्छी आई या बच्चों को बहुत मजा आया. This does not have any pointers. It doesn't have any numbers to be added to it. But these are emotional. But you've done system 2 first. You've not been fooled into buying a home just because it is from Towers in Pune. Looks like a parking lot from a distance. All right, just because it is XYZ Towers, I've not given into system 1. I've done all my rational homework of system 2 and then decided. Though you might have a bias.
Okay.
And you'll try and justify that bias, but you should speak to a couple of other people who do not have that bias. This is how you could avoid. But there's no particular decision. There's no decision, I feel personally, that it will not involve emotions or system 1.
Very interesting.
The only thing is that be reasonable, do some sort of homework, pause or stop, and then take the decision. All right. Otherwise, we'll get into a situation.
Cool. Great. Thank you, sir. We have a question, but the attendee is anonymous, but I'll still go ahead with the question. Curious to know about Malcolm Gladwell's Blink on Thin Slicing and Snap Judgments and this book. Are they both telling the same thing? Is what the attendee wants to know.
See, eventually everything will come down to only one thing, which is how our system works.
Okay.
All right. There's another book called Biology, B-U-Y-L-O-G-Y.
Biology.
Okay, by Martin Lindstrom, I guess. So he is also talking about same stuff, but in a different way. You look at Rory Sutherfield's TED Talk. He's the, I think, director at Ogilvy, London.
Yeah.
He will talk about the same thing in a different way. His talk is about perspectives. How do you look at things, and he'll give you a different perspective. All right. Daniel Kahneman is saying that these are the fallacies and these are the biases. Look at it carefully. Malcolm Gladwell is trying to say the same thing in a different way. See, eventually, most of the people would eventually come to the same point as to how does the brain work, how do we make decisions, and how do we fall for certain things that we should not be falling for. So all of these will converge. The more you read, you'll realize. And the next book essentially will converge even further. And it will probably remove a lot of biases in our head. It challenges, and it is a very book that challenges your brain, saying that, oh my God, I never thought about this like this. Stuff like this. But it will eventually be the same stuff in the core. The approaches are different. The methods are different. Daniel Kahneman is looking at it from economics point of view. Somebody else might look at it from a different point of view. From realist is talking about sociology in larger terms. But it is not about socialists, but people at large, etc.
Okay. Great. Maitri Bharadwaj has a question, a longish one, but we'll read through it. As both the sides have its own types of traps, may it be the emotional or the cognitive, and some people use it as their strategy to attack system 1 over system 2 and vice versa. How much to follow where our intuitions guide us for decision making? So I think that's the key question that
Interesting question. You might eventually land up into analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
That you are being fluctuated and oscillated between emotional decision or cognitive decision. To be or not to be wala decision leke you can sit idle for years, but eventually you have to take a decision. So eventually you take a decision, and most of the cases, 93% of times the emotion wins, because this is what your brain loves it. The only thing Daniel Kahneman is saying, or I would want to see, is don't only fall for emotions. Look at the cognitive side, look at the analytical side, support it with some sort of judgment, and then take a decision. If you're becoming too rational, too cognitive, too analytical, it might happen that you will not enjoy that decision after you've taken that decision. You'll be very happy that moment. Oh, I've done 1,000 homework, 1,000 Excel sheets, and this is the best decision ever in the world. Best. But you'll take that decision, and the next moment you will be unhappy, saying that maza nahi aaya.
Yeah.
So there has to be some amount of, I would say, balance, some amount of understanding, saying that is it becoming too far, too much. And I recommend, who was this? Maithili? No.
Maitri.
I recommend Maitri that you should read a book called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Okay.
Douglas Adams. Okay, it is one hell of a mad book, and it will pose you such stupid arguments, and it is absolutely fun book to read. Don't watch the movie, it is a terrible movie. Read the book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. All dark Brit humor, and it gives you all sorts of stupid arguments about aliens and humans, and it is not about a book about humans and aliens, but all the stupid things that we do in life. All right.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I think we are done with the questions. Over to Priya ma'am.
Great. So for more questions, to reach out to us offline on LinkedIn. There was a sentence here from Mansi Vaidya before we sign off. Just a minute. She says the sunk cost fallacy from thinking fast and slow is something that she can relate to on a daily basis while noticing the people and how she behaves.
Absolutely. I read that. Yes.
Yeah. So special thanks to our guest speaker, innovator, for his time and sharing the value-add takeaways from his literature-loving journey. In true virtual life mode, we request Shekhar to accept a small token of our gratitude, the certificate of recognition. We would have loved to hand it over in person, but in the current pandemic situation, this is the best that is safely and digitally possible. So may I request Professor Desai to please share the same?
Yeah. So we have put together something for the first time, because this is part of the grad show as well. I hope you liked it, sir. We are all dying to meet you and see you in person, and whenever we meet, we'll celebrate in a different way. But for this stage, this is what we have created. Thank you, sir. Thanks for all your.
Thank you so much. Thanks, MIT, Arshit and Priya.
Thank you, sir.
So we encourage you to connect with us via our social channels to know more about the MIT ID Innovation Program and upcoming engagements and online courses. And for those interested in becoming top-notch innovators, we invite you to explore our courses that will fast-track your career path. So log on to www.mitidinnovation.com to kickstart your innovation journey with MIT ID Innovation Program. Let's learn, innovate, lead. Yours innovatively, Priya Dhawan signing off. Thank you so much, Shekhar, once again. And everyone, stay connected, stay safe, and keep innovating every day.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Shailesh.
Thank you. See you next week. Bye.